Judge ready now?
Yes.
Opponents ready?
Yeah.
Yes? Okay. So, my time starts now. We affirm the result in the United States criminal justice system. Only people convicted of violent crimes should be sentenced to prison. According to the National Institute of Justice, a violent crime is when a person is harmed by or threatened with violence. Violent crimes include rape, assault, robbery, murder, etc. We define confinement in prison as a form of punishment imposed on a person who has been found guilty of a crime. Our framework is utilitarianism. According to the Merriam-Webster Dictionary, this doctrine states that the aim of action to be the largest possible balance of pleasure over pain, or the greatest happiness or the greatest number. We chose this framework because, 1, the debate round revolves around the fate of non-violent criminals and affects the general population as well. 2, by not sending them to prison and making rehabilitation centers an option for them, we can maximize the well-being not just for the non-violent criminals, but for the American population that is struggling to put food on the table too. Therefore, the pro side will win this debate round, and we prove that sending non-violent criminals to prison is unfavorable to both non-violent criminals and society itself, morally and economically. Contention 1, inhuman treatment and toxic atmosphere. Subpoint A, overcrowding is a leading factor of agony for prisoners, many of whom do not deserve this kind of gruesome treatment. Criminals that are convicted of violent crimes such as rapes, homicides, etc. should burn the amount of years in prison decided by the court because they are inflicting somatic pain on another human being, which cannot be undone. Non-violent criminals commit crimes that are usually very minor and do not harm anyone physically, thus not deserving the barbarous treatment in prisons. Based on an investigation by the Federal Bureau of Prisons, out of 100,000 prisoners, violent and non-violent included, 46.1% enter prison due to drug-related crimes, in which the criminals only doing self-harm by intaking drugs in their bodies and not affecting anyone else. Prison treatment, as mentioned before, is despicable. According to the American Civil Liberties Union, the deputies of Los Angeles County prisons harass the prisoners and deny them of basic necessities. Prisoners were not given access to proper medical treatment and beaten for requesting it by the deputies because of their alleged offense, as well as their skin color and gender. Deputies harass and beat inmates. Many attacks are unprovoked. Nearly all go unpunished. These acts of violence are covered by the department that refuses to acknowledge the pervasiveness of deputy violence in the prison system. While this sort of treatment might be justified for violent criminals that kill tens of hundreds of people, a non-violent criminal that is convicted of petty theft or vandalism should not have to live through the horror of being confined in an American prison and should be given an option to enter a rehabilitation center instead. In prisons, criminals that commit minor non-violent crimes are getting the same treatment as violent criminals that engage in nefarious activities such as rape and murder, which is clearly more serious than aforementioned non-violent crimes. This is morally unjust and makes huge amounts of unnecessary suffering occur for thousands of people. Subpoint B, non-violent criminals don't learn the necessary skills and techniques after being isolated from society so on to obtain a job after they serve their time in prison. In prison education systems, nobody ever fails any class. There's a lack of trained instructors and a scarcity of classes. Some education classes are even led by fellow prisoners themselves, and job skills programs are only available to inmates who are nearing release. The lack of education prisoners receive prevent them from obtaining jobs once they are released. According to Adam Looney, PhD, ex-prisoners fare poorly in the labor market. In the first full calendar year after their release, only 55% reported any earnings, with 32% earning between $500 and $15K. At this rate, the prisoners that are going to be released are going to be jobless, and this encourages them to commit more serious crimes to earn more money. This unfixable cycle will be detrimental to society as a whole, since crime rates would only get worse and worse, which leads to my next contention. Contention 2, skyrocketing incarceration rates. Subpoint A, incarceration rates are going up due to the fact that deterrence is not working. Since the official beginning of the war on drugs in 1982, the number of people incarcerated for drug offenses in the United States skyrocketed from 40K in 1980 to 450K in 2016. The American people must pay huge amounts of money through taxes to send non-violent criminals to prison. This lowers their after-tax income, which is deleterious to lower-income families who can use the money instead to buy everyday essentials. Keeping prisons opening and functioning is extremely costly. A new study examining the economic toll of mass incarceration in the United States, according to the Huffington Post, concludes that the full cost exceeds $1 trillion, with about half of that burden falling to families, children, and communities of people who have been locked up. The American people's taxes are being wasted since prisons do not reform prisoners in any way. The impact of prisons wouldn't hurt just the minority non-violent criminals, but would ultimately affect the majority of law-abiding American citizens as well. There are other options for the fate of non-violent criminals, such as community service, which can teach them the importance of responsibility and the value of hard work. Subpoint B, non-violent criminals have only committed crimes that don't involve physical violence before they enter prison, but once they come out, they acquire the necessary skills to commit violent crimes within society. This leads to recidivism, which is harmful to society as a whole. According to Stanton E. Mao, PhD, there's an inevitability to recession as you land in prison. You will turn to an even more corrupt person once you leave. Among prison inmates, the main topics of conversations in prison generally concern crime and drugs. Some commit crimes while incarcerated and plan new crimes they will commit once they are released. Some engineer crimes out upon their orders, others will commit outside the institution. A study conducted by the Federal Bureau of Justice Statistics found that drug offenders were the second most likely group to reoffend after property offenders. 76.9% of drug offenders released in 2005 were rearrested within 5 years. Nearly half of those within the first year of release. Imagine a petty offender, such as someone who drove recklessly, in prison alongside hardened criminals, where he or she is in a dangerous environment. Prison is an insidious problem that harms non-violent criminals and eventually will harm society if they decide to continue committing crimes once they are released from prison. This damages both non-violent criminals and U.S. citizens, mentally and physically, which links back to my framework of utilitarianism and my argument of maximizing well-being by not sending non-violent criminals to prison, and thus we urge a pro-val. Judges ready?
Yeah.
Opposition ready? Yes.
time starts now. Resolved. In the United States criminal justice system, only people convicted of violent crimes should be sentenced to prison. We negate. Framework. To say that only people convicted of violent crimes should be sentenced to prison is to say that the criminal justice system should not have the option of sentencing non-violent criminals to prison. Therefore, we win by showing that it is necessary to reserve this option for specific cases, such as when the criminal refuses to cooperate with rehabilitation programs. Contention 1, it is not a valid label to judge criminals. Subpoint A, plea bargaining. In the United States, about 95% of all felony convictions are the results of plea bargaining. One type of plea bargaining is when defendants admit guilty to a lesser charge, provided that greater charges will be dismissed. For example, it is a common practice to change a charge from driving under influence to reckless driving, or from armed robbery to robbery. The fact is that many crimes are not strictly violent or non-violent. For example, under the current system, whether or not a robbery includes violence can often be erased during the conviction process. This means that essentially we are not sure whether convicted crimes accurately represent crime severity. Reality shows that people who are convicted of a non-violent crime could potentially be a violent criminal and vice versa. This is because there is a distinction between convict and commit. In the current U.S. criminal justice system, criminals are not always convicted of the crime they committed. Therefore, a division of crime based solely on the conviction of the crime, as stated in the resolution, is flawed in the sense that convictions don't always equate to the actual seriousness of the crime. Other than the violence involved in the crime, we should also consider the intention, background, severity, etc., and other complex factors when determining whether or not a criminal should be sentenced to prison. Subpoint B. Non-violent doesn't necessarily mean less severe. The severity of a crime should not be based on whether a crime is violent or non-violent. There could be a really severe non-violent crime and a light violent crime. For example, let's just see one example. A non-violent drug lord running a narcotics ring in comparison with a violent criminal who was charged with aggravated assault because they had a substance abuse problem and they couldn't control themselves and they were under alcohol influence. We cannot generalize the intention, severity, and potential of rehabilitating a criminal solely on the fact of whether the crime committed is violent or not. In the example given, the non-violent criminal is definitely more dangerous in the sense that he or she intentionally committed the crime, whereas for the violent criminal, despite the fact that he or she may have committed a violent crime, substance abuse treatment programs are definitely significantly better than prison. Let's look at this more severe non-violent crimes in the real world. A group of criminals stole the social security numbers of 143 million Americans in 2017. That's 33% of the American population. This offense could potentially destroy someone's life by stealing their money in the bank, by committing crimes under their name, and many more. The idea is that to deal with these extreme non-violent criminals, whether they're cyber criminals, drug lords, or repeat offenders, the court still needs the choice of imprisonment. Prison acts as a way to deter and punish. To say that these non-violent criminals can walk free from this punishment is to overlook the losses of 143 million Americans who had their identity stolen. Rather than depending on vague measurement of violent or non-violent, crime should be judged by more specific measurements that can treat individual criminals case by case, rather than a broad generalization that's not even true in many cases. For example, the risk assessment tool used by parole boards to decide who to let out of prison uses a variety of facts about the offender's criminal history, mental health status, and prison record to statistically predict whether he or she is likely to commit a crime in the future. Contention 2, worsening the status quo. Subpoint A, loss of legal pressure. According to Principles of Drug Abuse Treatment for Criminal Justice Populations published by the National Institute of Drug Abuse, a large percentage of criminals participating in drug abuse treatment cite legal pressure, for example prison, as an important reason to complete the program. When you remove the consequence of failure of rehabilitation, criminals will simply stop attending these rehab programs. The option of sentencing non-violent criminals to prison is irreplaceable because it is what makes rehabilitation possible. There is little reason to believe that, say, a drug trafficker will abandon their profitable business and want to acquire skills for a legal job from educational programs, if not for the fear of being incarcerated. If we cannot spark motivations from the criminals themselves, then we have to use a way to push them, use this legal pressure, and the legal pressure is prison. Subpoint B, increasing crime rates. In California, after classifying drug and property felonies as misdemeanors, the offender faced no chance of a prison sentence, no matter how extreme their criminal history. One example of how ignoring the criminal history and focusing only on the conviction is going to lead to problems, because the result of that was in the first half of 2015, violent crimes rose by 13%, property crimes by 9%, erasing the 14% decline in violent crime and 6% decline in property crime over the previous 4 years. By drawing this line that treats violent and non-violent criminals differently, not only does it take away the deterrent effect, the court is also essentially encouraging people to commit non-violent crimes because the consequences in taking this action is lessened. As for violent offenders, this act of leniency towards non-violent offenders will also give them the idea that we're loosening our approach, our tough-on-crime approach, leading to an overall increase in crime as deterrence goes down. The value of prison lies in deterrence, and it works. According to Stanford University, prison makes committing crimes less desirable and achieve deterrent effects through its lack of freedom. Making prison an invalid choice for the judge will completely remove this deterrent effect. In conclusion, while we acknowledge the current problems in the criminal justice system as I stated, overpopulation, we believe that incarceration should still be reserved for certain nonviolent criminals as punishment and legal pressure. Yes, we should shorten our sentences, but this does not mean we should abolish our sentences completely. Thank you. Judges ready?
Yes.
Opposition ready?
So, as I stated in my contention 2, subpoint A, prisons can be quite costly to run as a tremendous issue right now for America. Do you have a plan to solve the budget issue? And if so, what information do you have to back up your plan?
Okay, so basically, overpopulation doesn't exist in both worlds because we're agreeing that yes, we should have low-level offenders. These offenders should still deserve rehabilitation. The point is that we're saying that not all nonviolent criminals should be let out. Yeah, we have evidence showing that 39% of the people in prison actually have no rationale of being there. If we let them out, they won't pose much of a threat to public safety, and we're saving billions of dollars from that. So the fact is, we are decreasing the prison population by at least 40%. Did that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay,
ask your question.
Yes, okay. So, just a very simple question. Do you believe that a more severe crime should be punished with a harsher sentence?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, that's all I need to know. Do you have a question?
So, do you have evidence to back up your contention 1, subpoint B?
That nonviolent doesn't necessarily mean less severe?
Yes.
Okay, so I gave you an example, specifically the cyber criminal who stole the identity of 143 million Americans. So the idea is that, yes, nonviolent crimes, they do include low-level offense, but they also include very severe ones. That's why we have the classification misdemeanors and felonies. It's not, the felonies, we still have nonviolent felonies, for example, the cyber criminal. Did that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay, so another point that you talked about is that you're basically talking about prison is bad, right?
Yes.
And we should use this alternative. But what is this distinction between nonviolent and violent? Why is it that we're only letting the nonviolent criminals out?
Let me answer that question. So, for violent crimes, for violent criminals, they're inflicting somatic pain or physical pain on human beings, and that damage cannot be undone. For example, if a criminal shoots or stabs someone, that damage cannot be undone. If the criminal kills someone, that damage can also not be undone. But for nonviolent crimes, it's often very limited to economic harm. For example, if someone steals some money digitally, that damage can be undone because that money can come back to the people. But however, the physical violent criminals cannot. It's undoable.
Okay, I get it. Can I ask a short follow-up?
Yeah, sure.
So basically you're saying if a crime, the consequences cannot be undone, we should sentence the criminal who committed this crime to prison.
You see.
If the consequences of a crime they're irreversible, we should sentence this criminal to prison.
Depending on the severity. Your second question, it depends on the severity.
Okay, so it depends on the severity. Got it. Okay, do you have a question?
We have 10 seconds.
Oh, how was your day?
Good.
Sorry. We were accused to play consummate. Sorry.
Do you need any prep time?
My time starts now. We continue to affirm the resolution that in the United States criminal justice system, only those convicted of violent crimes should be sentenced to prison. Firstly, about our framework class. Our framework is utilitarianism. The opposition framework is to serve justice. The opposition framework is the idea that we should punish prisoners based on severity and not like the nonviolent violent divide. We've proven that as long as prison systems exist, even if sentences are shortened and it's used as a backup as the opposition has stated, there is always dehumanization that's going to happen, and high cost, not because of the severity of the prisoner's crimes, but because of deputy violence and societal isolation. And we believe that as long as we have incarceration of nonviolent criminals as an option, there will always be this high cost to taxpayers, because this cost includes also like the idea that criminals can't get jobs and society has to pay for them. And this actually increases the poverty rate and decreases the ability of people to actually pay for their families. We've proven that people can't get jobs after prison because they're exposed to hardened criminals, and that prison education actually makes them worse, as long as it happens in prison because of the terrible conditions and the lack of incentive. So under a framework of considering both general society and victims, prison even as a last resort costs too much for both victims and the offenders. The opposition case is basically based on the idea that categorization is bad, and we can't only sentence violent criminals because some violent criminals are more severe, and that we should judge on a case-by-case basis. They argue that there's basically this gray area between crimes, and that criminals aren't always punished proportional to the actual severity of the crime. First of all, we believe that fundamentally, violent crimes, regardless of their intention, have to be punished more severely, because we have to fundamentally consider violent crimes above nonviolent crimes. because we value human lives and safety above other economic factors. While the legal system can easily pay back money that was stolen, and the crime can be undone, we fundamentally can't undo violent harm because it's directly done to the person. Also, the actual number of nonviolent criminals that actually cause significant harm is only 0.3% that embezzle, and the rest are drug drivers or drug users that only harm themselves. And under the opposition system, even if prison is only used as a backup, laws like the 3 strikes law mean that people like petty thieves and drug users could possibly be in prison for life. Do you really think that this is just? The nonviolent divide, even though it may not be perfect, gives a fundamental moral base for the criminal justice system. And without it, all the impacts that the opposition has stated, such as it being hard to judge the severity of crime, will be even worse because people can buy for themselves even more. In the opposition's world, if we don't even count physical harms that can't actually be undone above economic harms, then the way that a person is sentenced will literally only be based on the morals of a few, and not the morals of the general public, since we're basically giving the entire moral decision to the judge. Since we've proven with our daily signal card that 2/3 of the population supports retribution for violent offenders. The current categories are based on the public's fundamental interest. That's what this shows. If we remove this, then the justice system will only represent the opinions of individual judges, which means it would no longer serve the interest of the general population at all. So under our framework, it is not beneficial. And we have evidence that the actual runover and gray area they talk about is only 0.3%, so the impact of their case is extremely small. They also said that prison is necessary to maintain the systems of rehab because we have to threaten prisoners to stay there. However, we've proven that any education or rehab system that occurs in prison fundamentally doesn't work. Because first of all, it represents a prisoner's isolation from society. And also when it happens in prison, it's actual prisoners themselves and unqualified instructors that teach them. And we've proven with our evidence from ACLU surveys that rehab that happens in prison actually doesn't allow prisoners to even earn wages outside when they leave prison. So prison doesn't work even as a last resort. Finally, they talked about the deterrence theory, the idea that prison scares people off from committing crime and thus lowers the crime rate. But one problem is that it assumes that human beings are actually rational actors who consider the consequences of their behavior before deciding to commit a crime. However, this is often not the case. For example, half of all state prisoners were under the influence of drugs or alcohol at the time of their offense. Therefore, it's unlikely that such persons are deterred by either the certainty or severity of their punishment because of their temporarily impaired capacity to consider the pros and cons of their actions. And another way to understand why deterrence doesn't work is by considering the dynamics of the criminal justice system. If there is actually 100% certainty of being apprehended for committing a crime, few people would do so. But since most crimes, including serious ones, do not result in arrest and conviction, the overall deterrent effect of the certainty of punishment is substantially reduced. Also, the opposition's evidence about a decrease in the crime rate does not apply, and therefore we urge a pro-violence.
Can we have 30 seconds for prep, please?
Yes. I'm sorry.
Is everyone ready?
Yes.
Time starts now. I would like to begin with overview. Opposition, after the statement in Crossfire stating that a more severe crime should deserve more punishment. And they deserve severity basically on irreversibility, meaning that if a crime is irreversible, then this crime is pretty severe. And then also the severity of the crime is also taken into consideration. However, that's the cyber criminal that we had given in this debate. 143 million people's social security number. That's irreversible. If it's stolen, if it's given to the public, it's given to the public. Why? Because an American can only have one social security number in their entire life. Their identity is irreversible. Stealing their identity is irreversible. Okay, so basically what this means is that you judge. You should feel confident signing combat ready right here. Why? Because they're not arguing for their case anymore. Basically, this idea of severity should be based on severity, not be violent or non-violent. This division itself is flawed. The opposition even agreed that the American system means the punishment fits the crime. It should be based on severity. We tell you that we should let these low-level offenders receive other punishments, such as rehabilitation, such as the other things the opposition provided. However, this doesn't mean that a very severe, such as cyber criminal, this very severe non-violent criminal doesn't deserve prison. They even agreed that severity should be the only factor that's taken into consideration. If a criminal justice system doesn't even promote justice, it shouldn't even exist. If we take the resolution to the pro side, then criminal justice system doesn't exist at all because it's promoting injustice. This is simply unjust. Okay. For the sake of that, if you don't believe my case, what I just said, I'll rebut opposition's claims. First, they tell you about overpopulation. They tell you the current system the current prison is overcrowding, therefore we should let non-violent criminals out. That's simply not true. This is not true. This is not unique to both cases. What we are telling is that we want to let these low-level offenders, regardless of violence or non-violence, out of prison. According to our evidence from Brennan Center, that's really 39% of the entire population, saving us $20 billion annually. Basically, this idea doesn't matter. Second thing, they tell you that after the criminal justice system, after the non-violent criminals get out of prison, they don't have a job, they don't have anything. Okay? First of all, why does a non-violent criminal deserve that punishment? They don't deserve that punishment as well. Second, again, this is not unique to their case. What we're telling you is that these less severe criminals should also receive rehabilitation. This impact is not severe, it's not for any of the sides. Okay, moving on to the final claim of the opposition is on deterrence. They tell you that the current criminal justice system is not working. They tell us that recidivism is really high, and they offer us alternatives such as community service, such as rehabilitation. However, what we are telling you is that rehabilitation only works with prison. They told us because of this idea of deterrence, what we're telling you is that if you don't finish your rehab program, then you go to prison. The opposition told us that it's the severity that matters. However, our California evidence really shown when we remove prison for these non-violent criminals, crime rate simply skyrocketed. What this means is that whatever deterrence that was provided to these criminals that's not prison doesn't work at all. The idea certainly matters, but deterrence is that the severity of the punishment should also be taken into consideration, and it's a really important one. We do agree that we should provide more lenient sentences to some criminals in some occasions. However, that doesn't mean we want to completely remove prison for these criminals. Why? You are basically destroying this entire system that was working for the past 40 years. The idea is the deterrence effect has been working. Crime rates have been decreasing for the past 40 years. But the idea is maybe they have been raising for the past 2 or 3 years. We can't just say the system is not working. And the very last, let me rephrase our claims. What we are telling is basically we are providing a world in which low-level offenders should not be sentenced to prison. Remember, this is regardless of violent or non-violent. The idea is we believe that cyber criminals should not be punished less than someone who might be just made a mistake once in their life, and that's what Judge urged upon. Why exactly are we using this division, non-violent and violent? This is the essential question of this debate.
We're using this division because it basically gives a fundamental moral base for the criminal justice system, right? Like in your world, like basically we're saying that violent crimes are like on the mean more harmful because they actually cause like irreversible damage. And whereas economic crimes can be repaid. Like basically you're saying that we should judge it by a case-by-case basis. But if we don't even have this fundamental moral base, then we're basically giving like individual judges the overall the decision whether something is morally correct or not. If we don't have this moral basis, then it's literally only judges that are going to do this and not.
I respond to that. This idea of irreversibility is not unique to either violent or non-violent. We offered you an example for which is cyber criminals. After they've stolen American people's identity, their identity is stolen. It's irreversible. Because you can only have one social security number in your entire life.
Well, we've proven that the actual runover is only 0.3%. Like,
well,
only 0.3% of non-violent crimes cause significant harm.
Yeah, exactly.
If we don't have this moral basis, if we judge it by case-by-case basis, then there's even more opportunity for people to vie for unfair treatment.
Yeah, exactly. But even if there is a mistake, that means this entire system is flawed. What about drug lords? What about these people? They make people addicted to drugs. They put drugs in the United States. How is that reversible?
What we're saying is if we judge it by a case-by-case basis, there's actually more opportunities for irreversible crimes to be sentenced unfairly. Because under the current system, a large majority, 99% of non-violent criminals actually don't harm other people. They only harm themselves. Do you really think it's fair, with the 3 strikes law, for these people to be sentenced to a life sentence for only petty theft or drunk driving?
Yeah, you even agree that doesn't cover the entire population. Then how do you say that it should exist in the criminal justice system? There should not be an exception when it comes to the life of a person. You realize that you can't just say, oh, the 1% doesn't matter, because we're talking about the life of people. Realize, you can't just use stats to classify someone that's not
What
important.
we're saying is that like the nonviolent violent divide is necessary because like on the median nonviolent crimes are less severe. If we don't have this moral backing, then it's literally only judges.
Yeah.
If judges think that like violent crimes are worse, then they'll sentence them like easier. What we're saying is that it's not fair. We're considering actually the overall like offender population because like 99% of these nonviolent criminals actually don't harm other
If
people.
you're talking about severity, why don't you just use severity as a label, but non-violent violent? This doesn't make sense. Why don't we just use severity? That's what we are.
We don't have
Yeah, we are. We have a measurement. We have like the parole board risk assessment. That is exactly specific measurements based on case on case measuring severity. Why do you have to use this vague and not true division between violent and non-violent violence? It doesn't make sense to me in any sort of way.
But how can you prove that like the actual measures of severity if we're only using like that measure that you say?
Which one is more accurate, violent or non-violent, or 10 things considered together? Anyone learn science could know that, right? If I take like 10 things to measure and then a binary system, which one is more accurate? That of course, like the more specific measurement is more accurate.
You realize that even if we have like a nonviolent violent divide, there's also like sub-levels to this that like bad.
Yeah, exactly. But this division, this middle area is completely destroyed.
Judges ready? Opponents ready? My time starts now. Prison certainly serves its purpose to separate criminals from the rest of society during their sentences, but does not do much else to stop them from committing crimes again. Since criminals are separated from their families, jobs, and communities, it can be very difficult for them to return to society without turning back to crime. My opponent claimed that deterrence would work effectively in keeping Americans from committing crimes, but as my evidence from reputable sources proved, that is not the case. For example, half of all state prisoners were under the influence of drugs or alcohol at the time of their offense. Therefore, it is unlikely that such persons are deterred by either the certainty or severity of punishment because of their temporarily impaired capacity to consider the pros and cons of their actions. According to my card from The Economist, America passed the point of no returns long ago. Its incarceration rate rose fivefold between 1970 and 2008 relative to its population, and now locks up 7 times as many people as France, 11 times as many as the Netherlands, and 15 times as many as Japan. A 10-year sentence costs 10 times as much as 1 year sentence, but it is nowhere near 10 times as effective as a deterrent. Criminals do not think 10 years into the future, and they would take up some other line of work. Also, because mass incarceration breaks up families and renders many ex-convicts unemployable, it has raised the American poverty rate by an estimated 20%, since the risk posed by nonviolent criminals is low and often limited to economic harm. Keeping them out of prison could lead to better outcomes for society as a whole, which links back to my framework of utilitarianism and maximizing well-being of both the nonviolent criminals and the general American population. The American population can pay less taxes to run taxes, which goes to running prisons, which doesn't even work to deter crime, and the nonviolent criminals can get treatment for their mental illness or drug problems. Because our framework is considering the future of the entire American population, I strongly urge the judges for a pro ballot.
Judges ready? Opposition ready? My time starts now. First of all, going in the framework, they talk about utilitarianism, but how exactly are we going to evaluate? Ultimately, it's still on public safety, so this debate will just come down to public safety. Now, moving on, then, to give an overview of this debate, essentially they are arguing for a binary system, where we are arguing for a gradient system, which we have more leeway of actually giving these criminals the proper punishment they deserve. Now, first of all, going over the first class of this debate, distinction. In the first crosswire, the opposition already agreed that more severe crimes should have harsher punishments. They also agreed that a crime's consequence, if it's irreversible, then it should be severe. Well, you know what else is irreversible? Well, the fact that someone leaked my social security number, the trauma of a child pornographer, a child pornographer could have on society and children, and the indirect impacts of drug lords, causing instability in our society by ruining the lives of many people and introducing them to drugs. They assume that violence is more severe, but violence is more of a legal category. It doesn't accurately represent severity, and they already explained that there is a gray area. No matter how small that gray area is, there still is, and according to the resolution, as long as we find one exception, then we win this debate. And as they have already agreed, we should base it on severity. We cannot base it on whether or not, we cannot base this classification on a fact that's not even true. You can sign up con ballot right there because they're essentially agreeing with us. We should categorize based on severity and not the involvement of violence. The second clash is overpopulation, cost, and alternatives. Ultimately, this doesn't really directly attack our point because we also agree that low-level offenders shouldn't be sentenced to prison. This means that their claims that prison is bad is minimized because those low-level offenders in our world are also subjected to rehab programs. We're just saying that we can't have all nonviolent offenders there. The third point on deterrence, they say that, well, 10 years doesn't work. Well, if you look at California, well, you see a skyrocketing crime rate after we take away prison. This means that, yes, maybe 10 years doesn't work, but that doesn't mean we make 10 to 0. We can't do that. We can't abolish prison completely. We still need it. And why? Because they fail to address our legal pressure point. We need, the reason why rehab works is because we have prison as this deterrence, as this legal pressure. So ultimately, prison will need to be prison will still need to be an option for non-violent offenders for the fact of deterrence, legal pressure, and yeah, that's about it. Thanks. Ready? Yes. Okay, let's start. Would you like to ask the first question?
Yes. So you and your partner argued irreversibility, but isn't physical harm horrible and irreversible?
Yes, which is why violent criminals should also be sentenced to prison with the non-violent, serious non-violent offenders. Okay. I don't really have a question. In case it's pretty clear. Well, you stated that violent criminals should be punished more, right? Wait, but how does that equate to the fact that we are no longer punishing non-violent criminals with prison?
Well, we're saying that like violent criminals fundamentally need to be punished more because non-violent criminals like on the mean
Yes, they should be punished. I mean, even if I agree with that, I don't. But like, even if they should be punished more, how is it okay that we're just letting all these child pornographers, these drug lords, and these cyber criminals out?
We're first of all, actually in many states, like I have evidence that child pornography is actually considered like a violent crime. So
yes, child pornography, if you're taking it, is probably violent. But if you're just spreading the information, you still inflict trauma. You're still supporting the industry. This is not violent crime.
But I have evidence that in some states, like in many states, like South Carolina, just like the practice of spreading.
So in many other states, we're still like traumatizing children.
I mean, this is.
As long as I find one exception, it proves that we still need this option.
Because it states only violence. Find one, we win, basically.
And it's not even one, it's many states. It's 50 states. That's a lot of states. Do you have a question?
Okay, so let's get back to those. Why this division between violent and non-violent?
We're saying that like fundamentally it's more fair. Like you say that you're a gradient effect, but first of all, like ours is also a gradient. Like there's.
But you cut it way too early. It's like you have so much less.
Yours is a gradient area, except you cut it. You make a binary cut it first.
Fundamentally, ours is more fair to like a majority of non-violent criminals because.
It's not.
No, that's like saying like for SATs, those people who get bad SATs, I'm not even going to consider them. But what if they have a really good debate? Like, what if they're really good at debate, like you, right?
But no, it has a gradient. No, yours do have a gradient scale, but you have a binary cut it first. You cut it between violent and non-violent.
We can still consider
the
gradient.
actual gray area is like really small. It's like.
But there is one, right?
Close to zero. But what we're saying that this is better for like the rest of the 99% because. In your system, they're basically being sentenced like under the suicide law, so life in prison, even though they only did something.
We're not arguing for the status quo. Remember, we are arguing. We're telling you that low-level offenders should get out. It's regarding severity, not regarding violent or not.
How do you measure severity?
We can give you evidence of the fact that according to the Brennan Institution, 39%.
No. How do you measure? We already provided you a measurement. Like the parole board, we told you that we based on this gradient things on 10 facts that we consider about each criminal.
Like the mental health history, the prison record, and your.
Can you list all of this?
That's
probably an expression, probably not 10, but like
the risk assessment tool used by parole boards to decide who to let out of prison uses a variety of facts about the offender's criminal history, mental health status, prison record, and many more to statistically predict whether he or she is likely to commit a crime in the future. This takes into it also takes into account whether or not a criminal is nonviolent or violent. Thank you.
How much improvement are you like? 4 minutes.
We continue to affirm the resolution. And I'll summarize our main clashes and show you why we won this debate. Firstly, about our framework. Ours is about utilitarianism, whereas theirs is about removing this divide and actually sentencing based on severity. But we've proven that as long as prison systems exist, even if sentences are shortened and used as backup, as the opposition stated, there's always dehumanization and high cost, not because of the severity of their crimes, but because of deputy violence and isolation. The opposition has dropped this point. We also believe that as long as we have incarceration of nonviolent criminals as an option, there will always be this high cost to taxpayers and prisoners, even if you are incarcerated. Since people are isolated from society, and nonviolent criminals also cause taxpayers to incur higher costs, which increases the poverty line and harms the standard of living for both of these groups. So under utilitarian framework, our case is more beneficial. They then stated that categorization is bad and we can only sentence violent criminals, judging by case-by-case basis and based on severity. But without the nonviolent divide, there is no fundamental moral basis for the criminal justice system. Without it, the unfairness of trials that the opposition stated will be even worse, because people can vie for themselves even more. They talked about there's being a gradient effect, but the parole measures that they actually talked about, like family history and things such as this, and intentions, are extremely hard to measure. And they've not proven that this would actually help the judges be more effective, because these are extremely hard to measure. Without the nonviolent divide, we can't actually measure this, because we can't actually quantify whether a violent crime that harms a person or economic factors are worse. But we clearly prioritize human life because they are irreversible, and there's only a 0.3% run over. And we give a moral basis that helps the 99% of nonviolent offenders that don't deserve a life sentence. They talk about how deterrence works. They ignore our evidence humans are not rational actors, and half of all state prisoners were under the influence when they committed crime. They explain their deterrence effect with evidence that crime rates are decreasing, but have not actually linked this to prison. How can we prove that this effect was not caused by increased certainty? This could also work under our case with ideas like community service. They said the prisons necessary to maintain the systems of rehab and community service because people need to be threatened to stay there with legal pressure. They've ignored our point that any education or rehab system in prison fundamentally isolates criminals from society. So we've argued that under our framework of benefiting everyone, prison causes higher costs being incurred by taxpayers and also causes unnecessary dehumanization to non-violent criminals that don't harm anyone. So we promote a more humane society and urge a pro-violence.
Before I start my last speech that ends this tournament, I'd like to thank all the visitors, all the judges for coming here. Without you guys, we can't really be here. Thank you guys. Is everyone ready? Time starts now. I would like to begin an overview. The opposition tells us there's a distinction between severe and non-severe crime is on irreversibility. However, as we showed you, this idea of irreversibility is not subjected to either violent or non-violent. Therefore, this is a false debate. You can't take the resolution as a consideration. However, we offer a system that is already implemented in the parole board in the United States. This idea of violent or non-violent is part of this, but it's not even close to the most important factor. And the most important factor is actually severity. That's the reason why misdemeanors and felonies exist, to classify the severity of a crime. Basically, this is really helping the judge. Basically, this measurement takes consideration of offenders' criminal history, mental health status, and prison board. Their only response to this is that they also have a grading scale. Yeah, you do have a grading scale, but you made a binary cut already. There's a large prejudice under the system against the violent criminals. A person who committed a robbery under influence once in their entire life is considered worse than someone who stole 143 million people's identity. Okay, moving on to two most important issues in this debate. First, the terms. What I already told you about certainty, yeah, that's a theory. I don't care about theories. But let's look at reality. In California, after we classified non-violent criminals as misdemeanors, meaning that they face no risk of going to prison, however, crime rates skyrocket. What this means that whatever other solutions offered to these non-violent criminals didn't work on them. What this means that yes, deterrence may not work if we increase it largely. However, we can't take them all away. Deterrence has to exist. Some sort of deterrence has to exist. And the only deterrence that works right now is prison. That means we have to reserve the right to the judge to hold the right to sentence a non-violent criminal to prison. Okay, moving on to the last golden issue in this debate on money. This isn't really not unique to both cases because as the concept, we are letting out the low-level offenders, regardless of violent or non-violent, out of prison. According to our evidence on Brennan Center, that's really 39% of the criminals, also saving us $20 billion annually. We solved their problem. Okay, at the very last, we are also helping these drug addicts and these people that deserve rehabilitation. We are only division on severity, and that's what judges will combat.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Now we're going to collect the ballots after the
Thank you.
Collect the ballots.
Thank you. Thank you.
It's like arguing. Thank you.
It's like
It's a combination.
our kids, but way better. Our kids, but way better. Chris, your case is so awesome. Why is this case so awesome? I'm afraid I'm going to drop it.
Shocked that this camera didn't fall down.
我一直以为它会掉，你知道吗？
我一直以为今天这儿呢。